Good morning. More and more, the human factor is being pinpointed as the probable cause of the dreadful crash in which at least 29 people died over the weekend. The accident took place at Hinton, Alberta, roughly speaking between Jasper and Edmonton, and it'll be some time yet before the total fatality list is known. Here is an up-to-date report from Steve Wyatt on the situation this morning.
It will be a week before rescuers finish sifting through the wreckage. Freight cars and passenger cars are piled 3 deep at the crash site, about 240 kilometers west of Edmonton. It happened early Saturday morning when the freight train hauling 114 cars smashed head-on into the 14-car passenger train. They would have been traveling at 70 kilometers an hour. Recovery of the bodies began early Sunday morning. The first are the engineer of the freight train and a small child. The death toll has been set at 29, but there could be more as the salvage operation continues. There are 93 known survivors. 30 of them are from BC. They remember eating breakfast, and suddenly and without warning, a horrible crash.
The engine on the freight hurtled by, and I don't know whether it was a propane tank or something, blew, and there was just a great ball of fire. And this window blew out and showered me with glass in my eyes and head. And with that, simultaneously with that, I dove through the hole out onto the track, right through the flames, and seared my eyeballs a bit. But the plane just died immediately, except in the engine and around us. So I scrambled back up in the car and assisted 3 or 4 people to get out.
It wasn't so much trapped, it was they didn't know how to get out, probably shocked maybe. And we just helped. There was a whole bunch of us, we just helped break windows, help people out, which was all right, I guess. Scary. Yeah, it was pretty scary. A lot of fire, a lot of dead bodies.
This is CN headquarters in Edmonton. It is from here that all trains are regulated and their routes controlled by computer.
February 9th, 988 is an old Jasper JSP.
The operator at Jasper, period.
As the Via passenger train was traveling eastbound, the freight train should have been waiting on an adjacent track. The investigation is now centering on why the freight train was in the wrong place and heading on a collision course.
According to the computers in Edmonton, the signal system was functioning as it should.
So what does that tell you? I mean, does that tell you the lights were on or off or red or green or what?
There is nothing at the moment to indicate that they were not functioning normally.
Didn't rule out a malfunction of the signal system. I said that our tests, although extensive to this point in time, are still not complete, and the possibility still exists of a malfunction in the signal system. It would be difficult to give you a percentage assurance. Up to this point in time, we have not found anything wrong, but that possibility still remains.
CN officials surveyed the wreckage over the weekend. They say it now appears human error may be the cause. The freight train may have gone through a red stop signal. It was about 320 meters on the track of the passenger train when the collision occurred. The Minister of Transport has ordered a public inquiry into the accident.
And from the crash site near Hinton, here is BCTV NewsHour reporter John Daly. What's the score? What's the situation this morning, John?
Jack, right at this moment, I'm looking at a Dayliner coach. There's a large cat attached to it, and the rescue officials are at this point just tearing it apart with this Caterpillar tractor, trying to get inside and get the remaining bodies out. There is a fear that this thing might burn some more. It's still smoking. There's still approximately 120 men working here on the site. Very gruesome. Just an absolutely awful situation.
So therefore they'll be at that most of the day. They're building another track, but they haven't by any means finished the clean-up in the parts of the coach where the people were trapped, have they?
No, Jack. They only have 2 human remains so far. They did indeed. We showed last night on our news some extra bags of human remains. Unfortunately, a gruesome seen. These are only portions of people. They're expecting to find 27 more bodies or portions thereof inside this very, very badly burnt wreckage.
And there's been nothing fresh said this morning about the possibility of what caused the accident, except that the stress is now being put on human error, perhaps?
That's correct, Jack. All of the thinking still seems to be aiming at human error. One of the problems, of course, is going to be the remains of the engineer of the freight train and whether or not they'll be able to conduct any tests there. As far as I know, they still have been unable to re-interview the conductor on the freight train, who is the only crew survivor. He's in Jasper, and I understand that they plan to interview him again perhaps later today. Over.
My thanks to you, John Daly, and John Daly's reports, of course, will be in detail on the BC TV News Hour. Thanks, John. Hold on, will you please, John? Hold on. I'll put one hold here. For the balance of the program this morning, we're going to meet, once again, Tom Holmes, the president of ICBC, to bring us up to date on all the wrinkles and the good news and the bad news and your problems, if you have any, at ICBC. You're going to meet an unusual woman too this morning. She's a Grey nun, and she's a well-respected and senior cancer researcher. And her message is not the cheeriest message. She thinks, I suspect, that even without a nuclear holocaust, mankind's future may well be restricted, if not worse, by the effects at this moment in our atmosphere on everybody of low-level, man-made radiation. She is Dr. Rosalie Bertell, who is, heads the International Institute for Public Health Concern in Toronto. But first, Tommy Holmes after the break. Tom Holmes has been president of ICBC for how long now, Mr. Holmes?
About 5.5 years now, Jack.
And this year you'll tell us you gave us the best news ever. You gave us an average cut of 6.5% in our premiums, right?
That's correct.
As of January 1st. But is that a fair representation? Some people still pay more and some people pay less.
That's correct, Jack. We've always announced our rate variations on an average basis. And when you have an average basis, there's some below and some above that line.
What was your surplus last year?
We haven't finalized our year. We're just doing our audit. Internal auditors are finishing up now. But we reported at the end of the 9 month, I think our profit was about $52 million at the end of the third quarter.
52 million?
Yes.
But does that not mean you're still overcharging us for ICBC premiums? Aren't you supposed just to break even?
Yes, we are, Jack. And if you would do the multiplication on a 6.5% average decrease on about $750 million in premium income, that totals about $50 million in itself.
Now, the insurance industry seems to be in a bit of a mess these days, especially the liability insurance. Do you find that the damage awards which are given on ICBC claims are getting to the heights of the situation whereby you could be threatened if these damage awards in automobile cases are as high as one might think they are?
Well, Jack, that's a very difficult question to answer. In an automobile accident, when an individual gets the award, they always think they get too little, and of course, the insurance companies always think it's too much. So somewhere within there is the medium what they should be paid. And in some cases, you have to go to court to get that established.
And of course, you keep a very large reserve of what, how much to pay unprocessed or unfinished claims?
Our total outstanding reserves are in the neighborhood of $600–700 million. And those are the claims that we have yet to pay each year on the bodily injury.
But you are fully covered for any claims that are yet to come from actions already started or potentially thereabouts?
Yes, we are, Jack. We're fully funded and fully reserved, and the corporation is in solid financial shape.
A question I hesitate to ask, but how do we stand in our comparison of rates across the country now? At one time a great political issue in British Columbia, but apparently no longer.
Well, Jack, that's a very difficult thing when you're comparing
Do you claim
rates.
to be the cheapest in the country?
No, not the cheapest in the country, Jack. Because of the territorial variations in rates, we are, again, among one of the lowest on comparable cities and comparable operations.
Has all discrimination been wiped out now in relation to the application and receipt of automobile insurance? Used to be discrimination against women, against separated people, divorced people, Native Indians. Has all that now been wiped out?
Jack, there is no discrimination on the basis of age, sex, and marital status in ICBC's rating scheme.
But there is discrimination on the basis of where you drive your car in the main, is that?
Yes, there is territorial deviations in the rate, and there's also discrimination on that same basis that you mentioned on the use of the car, whether you use the car for pleasure or for business.
These are reasonable business discriminations, you say?
Well, if you take insurance and into that basis, and anytime you put people into certain classifications, that's discrimination in the two definitions. So yes, insurance business is discrimination, no different than life insurance. You discriminate on basis of age because of the risk factor.
You must have been upset by that court judgment which gave, I think it was a woman, no-fault benefits for a long time to come, even though she was injured in an unlicensed, off-highway, off-terrain vehicle.
Well, Jack, I don't think it's fair to say I was upset, but in the scheme of things, the rating structure that we have and the coverage never contemplated that type of coverage. And now, through some loophole, a lawyer has been able to go to court, and the court has made the decision that, yes, under the basis that we're structured, that could be included. So that individual then was awarded that by the court.
So if somebody with a valid driver's license was fiddling about on a farm on somebody else's tractor, that's an off-road vehicle, might not be insured at all, and gets injured in that, they could be entitled to no-fault benefits as somebody not connected with the highway in any way, shape, or form.
Well, again, you're using a situation on a farm, and because of occupation, some things are covered and some aren't. But very clearly, we had made no provision for the fact that we would cover unlicensed and uninsured people on all-terrain vehicles.
Now, I noticed there was a lot of trouble in Eastern Canada over the collapse, I think, of an American parent insurance company, and truckers were panicking because they couldn't get insurance. Has that concern reached the truck coverage done by ICBC at all, or have you picked up a lot more business because of it?
We have received additional business, Jack. Our position has been anyone that is a BC resident and has a license to a BC truck, we will insure, and there's no problem with it, and they are in the same basis in any other trucking firm in British Columbia.
I noticed, too, you're expecting a new flood of claims on another legal matter, that up to now a husband couldn't sue a wife or a wife couldn't sue a husband. What opened the door for a wife to sue a husband on the family policy if he's driven badly or been negligent in some way?
Yes, there was legislation passed by the provincial government last fall, Jack, that made interspousal tort claims possible.
Interspousal tort?
Right.
Common law as well as married?
Yes. Well, common law, again, that's another difficult problem depending on the definition and coverage. But yes, that exclusion from coverage was not in effect in Ontario, and the Canadian Charter of Rights had an effect on that also.
Oh, that's going to haunt lawyers. It'll be a godsend for lawyers for 1,000 years to come. One call we get quite often from people are that they're behind in their driver's license payments if they owe money for points.
Yes.
Right? They're going to get a job. They can't afford to bring their payments up to date on the money they owe you, and they lose the job. Do you not have a compassionate system whereby when somebody's really up against it and can't get a job without a license but hasn't got money to pay what's due to you, that you'll give them an edge and let them have the license on a time payment plan?
Jack, we've always done that. Anybody that comes to us and says, look, I've lost my license because of that, I have an opportunity for a job, we say, fine. What financial arrangements would you like to make? And we make financial arrangements and do it quite regularly. Every once in a while somebody comes along and says, well, I did it and I tried and they didn't live up to the payments, what they agreed to us. And we say, well, look, you didn't live up to it, so you don't get your license. And of course, that becomes very good publicity.
I noticed, let me ask you, have you maintained your no smoking policies throughout the ICBC offices, except, I believe, in certain designated areas?
Yes, we have, Jack, and it's come over very well, much better than we had anticipated. And I guess I was a bit of the problem. Everybody looked at me because I'm a smoker, suggesting that the policy would never go in because Holmes smokes. But indeed, it has, and I do not smoke in my office. And if I want to smoke, I go to the cafeteria or one of the smoking rooms to have a cigarette like anybody else.
And your nerves appear to be fine?
So far, so good, Jack.
Any questions you wanted to ask Tom Holmes, ICBC President? Ask them now, please. I can remember when interviews with you and your predecessors were screaming matches. That was a straight, modest, non-controversial interview. Maybe it's me. Go ahead, please.
Hello.
Yeah.
Hi. I'd like to say hi to Mr. Holmes. I'm afraid that I've had several run-ins with ICBC, and I was wondering, just how many people do you have answering the phone on your special toll-free line? And,
Why? Why do you ask that? Can you get an answer?
I've had several run-ins. I had a major problem up in the interior where I found that I was being found guilty of an accident I was in, or giving 100% responsibility without even being notified. And when I tried to contact them in Vancouver, because I was living in the interior, I couldn't get through for like 2 weeks.
Okay, did you finally get it solved? Did they still nail?
I went on CBC radio and ranted and raved and got an answer from one of the vice presidents at ICBC that I should call them on a special line. I called and they told me flippantly that they didn't know anything about it and they couldn't help me, and that was it. Goodbye. But my responsibility dropped from 100% to 50%.
How long ago was this?
It was a few years.
Oh, well, that's not quite fair to give me one a few years old. Yeah.
Well, we had some problems a while back, Jack, with phones and answering, but we think we've got those problems solved now. But really, the answer I would like to give to that gentleman is that if he had a problem with liability, why wasn't he dealing with the adjuster? And if the adjuster couldn't solve the problem, then he should have been asking for the supervisor. And if the supervisor couldn't help, then the claim center manager. And we do have a procedure set up for that, that gentleman is entitled to an answer and he should get one.
Go ahead, please.
Yeah, I have a question in regards to liability on rear enders. I was told through my own experience and others that if you if you run into somebody, basically it's going to be your fault for sure. Or if it's a rear end front end collision, you hit the rear of the car, it's almost always your fault. What would happen if there's two people together and the person in front of you puts it in reverse and drives into you, and he says that you hit him from the rear and you say that you didn't put it in reverse?
Okay.
Yeah, that's the statement that usually rear-end collisions, if you run in the back, you are at fault. Again, there's exceptions. If that set of circumstances occurred, you'd have to have a witness or somebody to see it to make that decision. Failing that, you would have to go to court, and the court would make a decision as to who is liable, and the court takes into consideration the credibility of the people and the witnesses.
Who takes it to court? If you turn me down, I've got to take it to court,
Yes,
right?
you would.
Go ahead, please.
Yes, I'd like to know why I can go out and buy, say, a $25,000 car and have it insured and be on the road in a matter of minutes. Yet if I buy a large displacement motorcycle, I can't get fire theft or collision until I write in and get your permission to get it.
I'm not sure. You've got me that one. I'm not sure that you have to write in.
You do anything over a 750cc motorcycle, you cannot buy fire theft and collision at the time of your sale.
Okay, that's news to me. I don't deal in the individual ones. I'd like to check that out. If you'd like to give me your name and number off the air, I'll check it out and find out what the answer to that is.
But you're obviously, you know what you're talking about, caller, right?
Yes, sir.
Up to 750cc, I can get fire theft and collision. If I buy a 1000cc, one of these giant $10,000 monsters, they won't give me it until I what?
You have to write it. You have to fill out a form, take the bike in, even if it's new, get it appraised, and send the form in, and they'll send you the form back and state whether they will or will not insure you. And on the form, there's questions like what kind of clubs do you belong to, and items like that.
Okay, again, you get the liability and coverage, and that's no problem. What you're saying is just the physical damage coverage that's creating a problem.
It must be your experience with expensive, highly powered motorbikes which makes you very nervous about insuring them.
Well, I understand that, Jack, but my problem that I have with the question is I'm not sure why we can't give that coverage right away. I don't see a problem with it, but let me check it out.
Hold on, we'll take your number. Go ahead, please.
Good morning, gentlemen.
Morning.
A question of an insecure load on a flat deck coming the opposite way. Now, and it's almost like a hit and run, whereby something flies off the back of the truck, hits your car, you're going in the opposite direction and carries on. Now, this means when you're going for a claim, you have no chance of stating your case, because the answer is, we'll try to locate him. Now, in this particular case, I picked up the piece of teflon that come off and damaged the car, turned around, went after the man, located him, managed to catch him. He denied it, showed him the product, couldn't argue with it, it was his, and then I got all the information I could. This was handed in. Now I've got to sit and wait until this man reports, which he hasn't done in months. The answer is we've been unable to locate him because he was a casual driver for somebody or other, and I'm getting the runaround.
Well, first of all, your claim could be paid under the comprehensive section of your own insurance policy, subject to your $50 deductible. That gets your car repaired.
Yes, this is the answer. They say, well, you go ahead, pay your deductible, and then wait for your claim. Now, he tells me that you cannot get, they cannot get a hold of him, but when he comes to reapply for his license, then you can get a hold of him. So that could mean I've got to wait 12 months.
Well, no, I don't understand that. That may be some misinformation or misunderstanding. But first of all, for that individual to be responsible, there has to be legal liability on the part of that truck where that piece came off. If it just flew off or fell off or wasn't properly screwed, I don't know. But again, there has to be legal liability on the part of the owner of that truck before we can collect.
Yeah, but wouldn't you pay that under the man's own comprehensive?
Certainly, right away.
But why must you take his deductible when he's got a good solid case? Here's the thing that came off. Here's the name of the guy. Well, you're still going to make him wait before he gets his deductible back from the other company.
Well, certainly, Jack, because I don't know whether that individual that was driving that truck was liable or not. I mean, because something fell off doesn't make him legally liable for that accident.
But the truck insurance would cover it.
If he was liable for it. Again, the whole thing you have to remember in an automobile accident, there has to be legal liability on somebody's part.
So how much is your deductible, caller?
300.
So you're out of 300 until he comes in for his license?
Well, yeah, plus the 650 insurance for my own car, which is a $950 total for the year. Incidentally, the insecure load that the police put it down to was the actual steel footstep that you use to step on to get into the flat deck. It's part of his vehicle, but they put it down as insecure load. Now, this was a faulty piece of equipment on the road.
That's an interesting one. Let's know how you get on. Go ahead, please.
Good morning, sir.
Morning.
How are you today?
Good.
Good. I just moved here from Saskatchewan. I have a car in Saskatchewan, one in Alberta, and I have one here. And I'd like to ask you the age-old question. Why is insurance so much more expensive in BC rather than Alberta and Saskatchewan? Like 40% higher here than in Saskatchewan, and maybe 20% higher than in Alberta.
Okay.
Well, that's something we touched on earlier. Insurance rates are based on territorial rates, and there's a difference in the number of vehicles in Saskatchewan as against British Columbia. There's a difference in terrain, there's a difference in weather, and there's a difference in accident frequencies. All those things are all factors, so that we have the same thing right here within Vancouver. Victoria, for example, is about 35% cheaper than Vancouver. So all those are there and they're factors.
More with Tommy Holmes, your questions after the break. You see, that chap who phoned just now, you were telling me if that particular piece of the truck flew onto his car and hit it, it's a flying object and that's under his comprehensive. Mm-hmm. If it had fallen onto the ground and he hits it, it's under his collision section.
That's correct.
If it's comprehensive, he doesn't lose his discount.
No.
But if it's collision and there's no liability attached to the truck, he loses his no claims discount.
Absolutely correct, Jack.
Think the day will come when no fault will be universal and your insurance will cover you for anything that happens, even if you're, providing you're not drinking?
I think, Jack, that the existing tort system has many, many faults, and it creates a tremendous adversary system. And somewhere along the line in the future, I think that no fault will become far more predominant as a way of life in car insurance.
But not today.
Not today.
Go ahead from Squamish.
Yes, Jack, I'd like to ask a couple of questions here. One, I was wondering why it is necessary to penalize working people for going to work when they may only drive, say, a half an hour to work and a half an hour home, where a pleasure driver may drive quite a bit during the day. The other question is, why doesn't ICBC, instead of giving an overall 6% discount, give further incentive to the safe drivers with just giving a discount to the safe drivers, never mind the rest of the drivers?
Good point.
Well, first of all, it's only the safe drivers that get the discount, and we increased the safe driving discount this year from 35 to 40% for exactly that reason, to give the people that are accident-free the lowest possible rates, and that's exactly what we've done. Now, in answer to your first question, penalizing the driver that drives to and work, it's not a matter of penalty, it's a matter of grouping people into groups based on the type of risks and the exposure. And there's definitely a larger exposure for people that drive their car to and from work than the people that don't. Now, in that, there's going to be some exceptions. There's people that are retired that you can say that drive to California 3 times a year and therefore drive more, and that's absolutely correct. But as a group and a class, the people that use their car to and from work have more accidents.
Go ahead from Nanaimo.
Good morning, Jack. Good morning, Mr. Holmes.
Good morning.
I have a small problem that my wife had an accident on Tuesday, and it seems that we have a little Honda Civic that's only worth $2,500, well, $1,000 so ICBC says, and we can't even rent a car because it comes off the cost that it costs our car to repair. It comes off the price of our car. Now my question is, why is that? And why would a person with a $20,000 car get all the rental car that she wants?
Well, no, what you say is only half the story. If you have a rental car and you are not at fault in the accident, you're entitled to have a replacement transportation.
That is correct, but my wife was proven 100% not at fault.
Well, then there's no reason why she can't, she's not entitled to a rental car for the length of time it would take to get that car repaired.
Okay, now our car is only worth $1,200 according to ICBC. The repairs are coming to $1,050, so they say. But our poor little car is all we have, and I just rebuilt the engine on it. Doesn't that increase the price?
Not necessarily, but let's answer the first question. And the rental is not deducted from the price of the car, period. I don't know who told you that, but
If
that's
I am
correct.
not to blame in an accident, I can get a rental and you'll pay the bill.
Certainly. You're entitled to that under your normal tort claim.
That's once I get the ruling that I am not to blame in the accident.
That is correct.
But not before then.
That's correct.
And then I can bill you for the use of the rental car.
Yes, again, it has to be reasonable. You can't rent a, in this particular case, you can't go and rent a Cadillac to replace a
$1,200 Honda.
and then keep it for a
is what
month.
we go after.
No, but as I say, I was using it the illustration purposes, but indeed, you're entitled to a car, and if it takes 4 or 5 days for that car to be in the garage to be repaired, then you're entitled to the rental for that time.
What about if they say it's written off? Like, we're without a car, and I have to drive to work, and it's really a hassle for us. The lady that hit my wife, she was making a left-hand turn in an intersection and hit her as my wife was going straight through. Now, she's got her car, and she's running her all over town, and we're without a car because they might rent it off.
Well, again, you're in the same position. If you're entitled to, if they're going to write the car off, it doesn't make any difference. You're without a car for a reasonable time until such time as the adjuster makes you an offer, and at that time, then the offer is accepted, then the rental would stop.
Have you had your rental car?
Not yet. We haven't received it. The adjuster says we may not receive one because it comes off the price of our car, according to ICBC.
No, that's not correct.
That's not correct. Check your adjuster again. I don't have to get a special thing in my policy to qualify for a rental car.
You can, Jack. Let's change the circumstances a little bit, that you were involved in the accident and it was your fault, and you did not buy loss of use coverages, then you would not be entitled to a car. But you can buy loss of use coverages to cover a rental car if you are at fault.
No matter who's,
Right.
if I'm at fault. Go ahead, please.
Good morning, gentlemen. I've got a couple of claims that have been ongoing with ICBC, and I must say I've been less than satisfied with the way they've been going. One of the claims happened about 2 or 3 years ago. Was in a parking lot. I had a little bit of a fender bender with the gentleman. We took to our adjusters. The adjuster originally said it was 50-50. Then she talked to the other adjuster for the other gentleman, and then she changed it 100 my fault. The other, ended up taking it to court. The judge went somewhat in my favor, 25% my favor, and I initially paid out the gentleman for the full repair, and now ICBC, I paid them, the whole amount, and now I can't get my 25% back. Now, what's my recourse there?
I don't understand all that, but again, if there's a problem, either check with the claim center manager, or if all else fails, drop me a note in the mail and I'll check it out.
You will you?
Surely.
Because we can't go into all these details. I'd rather get questions of general knowledge, general interest. Go ahead, please.
Good morning. I have a 1980 Honda Civic insured for $200 deductible, 100 comprehensive, and it cost me $505 to insure it for a year.
Right.
I have a 1985 Hyundai Pony, same insurance, same coverage, and it cost me $569 per year. 5 years difference. How come? I'll hang up and listen.
Well, again, you've hung up and listened. I can't answer the question. Are both rated the same? Are they both used for pleasure, or is one used to and from work? I don't know. It depends.
I was too quick.
And again, it would depend on whether he's had any accidents or what discount he has on each vehicle. So that's possible.
Let's have one more session with Tommy Holmes after the break. Go ahead, the president of ICBC.
Good morning. My insurance rate has gone up $21 this year. I'm retired, no accident, pleasure only. And when I asked ICBC for an explanation, they indicated that all premiums have, or all motors premiums have practically gone up. The only thing that's happened is the claim discount rate has been increased from 35 to 40%. Isn't that a bit of a smokescreen saying that premiums have gone down?
Well, sir, I don't know who you talked to, but I don't know anybody in the corporation that would have said that your all premiums have gone up, because that's not the case. And our employees and the people know that very well.
Well, I phoned twice about that, and I got the same answer.
Well, there's a 6.5% average cut.
Yes, but again, the average cut is based on an individual that has complete coverage, is liability coverage, collision coverage, and comprehensive coverage. And the
no claims bonus.
And the no claims bonus. If an individual just had liability coverage, his premium would not be down by 6.5%. In some cases, it may be up by 1% or 2%.
Go ahead, please.
Hello. I was delivering pizzas at one point in time, and I got a few tickets, and not only did I have to pay to the city of Vancouver, but I was also having to pay points to ICBC, which I feel is totally unfair, and I see no reason why I should have to pay to both.
You mean you got a parking ticket and you also got points because of your offenses?
Right.
What were you delivering the pizzas in?
My own car.
In your own car?
Well,
double jeopardy, he says.
Jack, I don't know of any fine that you pay to a municipality that carries points with it. Parking fines certainly don't carry points with them. Speeding does, but you don't pay a fine to the city of Vancouver for a speeding ticket. You get a number of points on your driver's license, 3, and if you have more than 5 points, then you are charged and billed for the penalty points under the insurance scheme. But you don't pay any fine to the city of Vancouver.
Thank you. Go ahead from Lake Erock. Where's that?
Yes, good morning, Mr. Holmes, Mr. Webster.
Where are you speaking from?
Lake Erock?
Where's that?
It's out by Hemlock Valley.
Oh, yes. Go ahead, please.
Okay, my question is, why did ICBC stop the payment plan?
The time payment plan on your premiums.
That's right.
Yes, very simply, the cost to run the payment plan was quite substantial, and there was less than 15% of the motorists taking advantage of that, and that meant that everybody else was having to pay and subsidize for the finance plan.
So that was one of the handiest things.
Well, again, in most cases, there are ample number of facilities and institutions that can able to handle that small amount of financing.
Thank you. Go ahead from Victoria.
I'm Shawnigan Lake, Jack. Good morning.
Good morning.
I'd like to clear up a point raised by an earlier caller about the motorcycle insurance and then ask a question. The gentleman said you couldn't get quoted on a motorcycle over 750cc. ICBC has changed that this year. You can now get a quote up to 1149cc. After that, you have to get an appraisal and then the quotation. My other point being is that anybody, I should say anybody, most people who have motorcycles of this size are touring motorcyclists. We're mature, we don't drink, we drive in the wide open spaces, and yet we are lumped in with the young fellow on the crotch rocket who tears around and rides at night in the city and usually, can involve alcohol. And we're lumped into the same group. To make my point, I have a friend in Calgary who's wintering down here. He has a 1100cc motorcycle, full coverage worth $13,000 and $50 deductible. His fees are $359 a year. To get the equivalent coverage here in BC, my fees would be well over $1,000. Now, isn't that some kind of discrimination?
Well, certainly, and we base our rates on the experience of motorcycles in that particular class. You said something earlier that that particular large motorcycle is only used by a certain group. If that group, and we have them classified as such, shows that the loss experience is horrendous, then our rates are predicated on that loss experience completely.
I think we've talked about this before, so you're claiming they're made in BC rates.
Certainly.
And how come our two adjoining jurisdictions don't have the same experience?
I'm sorry, I can't answer that. What you're asking me is to give you the reason why the motorcycle experienced riders in Alberta are different from British Columbia, and I don't know the answer.
Sir, that you're lumping us in with another more dangerous class of rider.
No, I don't think we are. Motorcycle rates are taken as a group, and then from that they're broken down into the use of the vehicle and into the size of the vehicle. And
Gotta
if
leave
it
it
falls
there.
within that, it is discrimination on that basis.
Go ahead, please.
Yes, I owed ICBC $300 in 1979, and my license was suspended in '82 for 6 months.
Yeah.
And I was wondering what connection ICBC and the motor vehicle branch have, whereas the motor vehicle branch would suspend my license if I owed ICBC money.
Yes, the connection is that if you owe money on penalty point premiums and you do not pay them, the motor vehicle department will not renew your license until you have paid your debt.
Go ahead, please.
Hello, I'm in the taxi industry in the Lower Mainland, and we're on the fleet insurance. And my competitors, who are also in the same area, in the same territory, do not use fleet insurance. They are enjoying this 30 and 40% discount because they have their vehicles in their own names, and when they do have accidents, they move them into their brothers, sisters, or cousins. I have complained about this, and I still haven't got any action, and I don't think it's fair to the companies who are on fleet insurance.
Well, I agree with you there. The loophole of trying to move the registration of a vehicle that has an accident into someone else's name is there. We have programs to trace them down on those particular cases and check the registration who it is, but it's time-consuming and difficult.
But I thought most of the taxis, you people have been telling me, my agents and other people I've been talking to, the taxis are going to have to go into fleet insurance. I am paying approximately 30 or 40% more in the same area for my vehicle because I went on the fleet plan, and I only rate a 10% discount, I think, last year, and I don't know I'll get this year. But these other guys are getting the 30 and 40% because they got in their own names and they got private, they get the discount.
No, an individual, a company has the opportunity at any time to either have the policies under a fleet policy or have them all rated individually, and in which case they would be subject to the discount the same as any other private passenger car. But the fact that they do transfer their vehicles from one to the other is there, and it's very real. It's a loophole.
But you want to plug that loophole.
We are working on it. We've got a computer program where we do check where a vehicle that has had an accident is transferred. We want to know who and why. And in a lot of cases, they try to wheel and deal between the husband and the wife or a child and not pay the sales tax on it, too, which isn't, again, kosher. And indeed, if that's what happened, they have to pay sales tax. So all those factors are there, and it's like anything else. We cannot build a system that is infallible, but it's a very real one, and we are working on it.
My thanks to Tom Holmes, president of ICBC. Next, we're going to interview Dr. Rosalie Bertell on a very unhappy prognosis for a radioactive Earth after the break. Dr. Rosalie Bertell from Toronto is a renowned cancer researcher, authority on nuclear power. She's a scientist, she's a founding member of the International Medical Commission in Geneva, has been a consultant to the U.S. Nuclear Regulatory Commission and the U.S. Environmental Protection Agency. And now she's heading up an organization I haven't heard of before, and it's called the International Institute of Concern for Public Health in Toronto, correct?
Correct.
And as I read your book, I come across some very depressing stuff indeed, that even without nuclear war, the 1,200 bombs already exploded in the atmosphere may well be killing us all off.
Yes.
Am I overstating the case?
No, I think it's a matter of slow death by poisoning or rapid death by a bomb or a catastrophic accident. We've really done an awful lot, and I think people are unaware of the fact that much of this radioactive material released in the bombs is in the upper atmosphere. So, for example, in the Northern Hemisphere, according to the United Nations, there's 157 million tons of radioactive fission products just slowly coming down in the Northern Hemisphere, and another 67 million tons in the Southern Hemisphere, and that's as of 1976.
Now, what do you predict, therefore? What shows already in the presence of new forms of illness? I mean, is it the kind of thing that one should not just accept as a matter of fate because there's nothing we can do about it now, is there?
Well, you know, if you told people they just had to have a few cases of polio, they'd be outraged. But if you tell people they're going to have a few cases of cancer, they feel helpless. And we don't need to have all the cancer. I just returned this morning from the Marshall Islands. And
the Marshall Islands in the Pacific. That was where the Americans did much of the nuclear testing without clearing the natives very far away.
Well, and most people know about Bikini,
yes.
1954, and the Rongelap people were exposed to the fallout. They were not in the bomb, but they got the fallout. Just that population, if you look at the children who were under 10 years of age when they got this fallout, 88% of them have had thyroid nodules and surgery. You know, 88% is an astonishing number.
Of children under the age of 10 who were in the area of the
just
Bikini
got a
Atoll.
little fallout. Well, no, they were in Rongelap. They were 150 miles away. They weren't even in the bomb. They were in the path of the fallout.
But your book actually says, Rosalie Bertell, no immediate danger, question mark, prognosis for a radioactive Earth. Well, we've got the radioactive Earth now then.
Correct, and we're making it worse. You see, we're spending people's lives for our security. So we're killing people because of our paranoia with nuclear weapons. And I'm talking about the uranium miners and millers, the men that work in the power plants, those that separate the plutonium, the ones that make the bombs and test the bombs or live downwind of the bombs. And we have a large number of casualties. It's already between 12 and 16 million. I would imagine by the year 2000 it'll be up to 20 million. And casualties, I mean the cancers, the infant deaths, the children with congenital malformations. You know, this is the price.
What you're telling me is that, you know, if an idiot like myself gets cancer because I smoke, I deserve it. I should have stopped years ago. But what you're telling me is that what we think are natural causes in the current outbreaks of all these esoteric illnesses are not natural causes.
Certainly a large proportion of it is caused by our military pollution.
Has there been a deliberate attempt to keep secret from us the damage from man-made radiation? Can you point anything in that direction in the way of proof?
There certainly have been cover-ups. Some of the really massive ones are coming out now from the Nevada test site. But if you even go back to the very basic studies which were done in Hiroshima and Nagasaki, when I did the research there, I found that they actually, when the Americans set up the research center, they told the Japanese physicians and scientists that they were not to do any research on the health effects of the atomic bomb, that would be done by the Americans. And one of the doctors, Japanese doctors, defied that order, and he actually was the one who told about the leukemia, and the American Research Station disputed it and said he wasn't true. He then talked a young medical student into taking 2 years off of med school, going around individually to each hospital, reviewing the cases, looking at the lab tests, and documenting it. And finally, the Americans not only admitted it, but then they took the credit for finding the leukemia.
But you yourself have done much of this cancer research as a scientist and a researcher, have you not?
That's right.
Can you, not that I'm looking for frightening statistics, but I presume the rate of leukemia and cancer and genetic damage can be demonstrated to have exploded since the Hiroshima and Nagasaki.
It certainly has gone up, and there's always mixed causes, and one thing aggravates another. So, for example, you were talking about smoking a few minutes ago. Well, everybody knows now that if you're a smoker in a uranium mine, you're going to get the lung cancer much faster than a smoker who's not exposed to radon gas. As you begin polluting the whole of North America with radon gas, your smoking becomes worse for health than it was, say, in the 1930s. So what we're saying here is we can also make other health problems worse.
By the radon gas. What is the radon gas? But tell me about radon gas after the break. Okay. And calls, too.
Okay. Or weapons.
Go ahead, please.
Yes, hello.
That's you, ma'am.
Yeah, okay. I'm phoning to do with the pulp and paper industry in Ontario, the Dryden pulp and paper and the Wabigoon River.
What about them?
The mercury problem?
The mercury problem. Yeah. My father was a commercial fisherman. I have formed epilepsy. Mm-hmm. And I'm interested in knowing more about this. The Indian reservation along the Kenora Wabigoon River were paid off within the last couple of years.
What can you tell us about mercury pollution?
Well, we're working, on public health problems such as mercury, and probably be better if you wanted something specific if you got in touch with the Institute. We did start an institute in Ontario. We deal with environmental health problems, so things that are in the environment that are making people sick. So if you write to us in Toronto, we could send you some information.
Go ahead, please.
Yes, I was wondering, have your studies led to any theory, I guess you might say, of how many people are going to be affected by this in the next 10 to 20 years if we don't stop the testing of these bombs?
Yes, I have done a major research paper which has been accepted for publication but needs some updating, and I haven't had time to update it, but I'm hoping it will be out maybe by fall. Mostly my schedule's pressed and I don't get the things finished. Also, I tried in my book to cover a good bit about what we've done so far, what a commitment we've made into the future because of the waste, and then how much waste we're generating every day by not stopping what we're doing.
You say that the escalating radiation levels have already caused some 16 million casualties. Do you mean deaths?
No, I use the word casualties very deliberately. Some people have to live with the damage. So you have a child with a congenital malformation. You could have a deaf child or a blind child or mentally retarded. They're casualties in a very real sense of the term. So I use that word deliberately.
Is that 16 million an acceptable figure, and can you back it up?
Yes, it's based on two things: the United Nations estimate of the pollution from nuclear support industries and from nuclear test shots, and then conservative estimates of how many health effects that's causing globally.
Go ahead, please.
Yes, good morning. I was just in the Cook Islands, and the French were doing tests just outside of the New Zealand's territories, the Cook Islands and French Polynesia. And they did some tests when I was there, and a lot of people were really concerned about when the rains came after the tests that there'd be contaminants in the air. Well, these tests were bombs which were underground tests. Do contaminants get into the atmosphere with these kind of tests? And if so, do they get into the rain system and then into our drinking water?
That's the pathway for the atmospheric tests. I was also in Tahiti in September, and they're testing not only under the ocean water, but deep into the basalt rock under the base. So all of those tests, whether they're underground or underwater, leak usually the radioactive gases, some particulates, the iodines. But in the case of underground, underwater, it would be injected into the ocean. Probably not get into the atmosphere, but you can't rule out the food chain via the fish and the plankton and so on. So
whatever you do
eventually it
gets into the food chain
Sure.
and into the atmosphere.
Our Earth is made that way.
More with Dr. Rosalie Bertell after the break.
Good morning, and a few words now about today's news. A few minutes.
Well, my discussions with the Premier are private.
Are you upset that this all came out?
Of course I'm embarrassed and upset, yes, but so what? That's life.
Mr. Nielsen, do you think the incident has affected your credibility?
Well, I don't know. That's not for me to decide. That's for others to decide, obviously.
Will you seek re-election in the next election? Will you run again when you're running?
Certainly, of course.
The Premier said you're going to have to straighten things out with your constituents. How are you going to go about that?
Well, I guess any time you seek re-election or renomination, you have to straighten things out with your constituents because they're the ultimate judges. They make the decision for you. But that would be normal procedure in constituencies.
You're not doing any.
5, 4, 3. When did you form this? When was this international commission formed in Toronto? International Institute for Public Health Concern.
1984. So we're pretty new.
Pretty
we're
new.
Now charitable, tax-exempt organization. We're doing health assistance as well as health research.
Analysis. Go ahead, please.
Yes, this is a question about the testing.
Yep.
And I was wondering, as far as I know, that I didn't know if this was going on at all. And I was just wondering if the bombs blew up above the country or they just blew up over the other country or in the atmosphere somewhere where we don't know. And as far as I know, I didn't know that any of this was going on. So I'd like to hang up now and listen.
Well, you don't make much sense in your question, but I think it's an accurate fact, is it not? There have been 1,200 bombs exploded.
Yes, they did it in all places, underwater, underground, above ground, in the upper atmosphere. They even set them off in the Van Allen belts, way up in the stratosphere.
And we're talking about both the Russians and the Americans and
yes,
the French
and
at one time the British.
And, yes, everybody. U.S. has set off about half, and the rest of the people the other half. When they first set them off, they said the fallout would go about halfway around the world. And what they found was it went around about 2.5 times, and then some of the material stayed up in the upper part of the atmosphere and is still coming down. So they pretty well blanketed the whole northern hemisphere. In the southern hemisphere, it's about 1/3, maybe a little more than 1/3 of what there is in the northern
But you
hemisphere.
used a horrendous figure. Give me that figure again for the northern hemisphere of radioactive pollutants in the atmosphere.
According to the United Nations, there's 157 million tons of
Million tons
fission products up there coming down. Now, a lot of that is going to go into the oceans because some 75% of the surface of our Earth is ocean. So it's heavy. It'll go deep into the ocean and then move up to the plankton and the fish. And again, it will recirculate and it will eventually become parts of our body.
But that 157 million was caused by atomic explosions one place and another.
That's right, all over the Earth.
Go
all
ahead,
over.
please.
Well, Mr. Webster.
Yes.
I want to talk to your guest about an incident that happened in the San Francisco area shortly after the Second World War when the military dumped
something like 200 barrels of nuclear waste off the Mendocino coast. And shortly afterward, just about 2 years ago, they found mussels that were not mussels, but sponges that were growing from these barrels that were 10 feet tall, which is an enormous size.
Yeah.
How much?
10 feet tall.
10 feet tall. And they're wrapped around these barrels, which are now rotted, you know, and open.
And also, the fish all the fish in that area right now are they're all contaminated. They have all kinds of tumors.
Yes.
All over the fish. They have to be thrown back into the water because nobody wants to process them. Now, you know, we have to get rid of a lot of nuclear waste at the moment.
Sounds like
I
science
think
fiction.
it's getting to a dangerous amount.
Just a minute.
Well-
Tell me about these barrels created huge 9 to 10 feet tall sponges that grew
Yeah,
around
well,
them.
that's not too dissimilar from a cancer, you know. It's a runaway growth. So what you have here is cells that are proliferating, and they don't stop and rest. So you get giant plants or giant sponges.
Excuse me, Mr. Webster.
Yeah.
The thing was, you see, after the Second World War, this was top secret, and this general that was just retired brought this open to the public. I wonder how much more right now that is in the Pacific and the North Atlantic that is being kept secret.
Yeah.
Especially in, you know, like I'm a little bit concerned. I'm a Canadian, and in our Canadian waters, Pacific. I mean, this stuff was dumped in the Pacific Ocean off the Mendocino coast of California.
Good point.
Which is only about 1,800 miles from here.
Correct.
Thank you.
Yeah, you'll find a good bit of that in my book. Also, you know, when the Navy took some of these barrels out, they didn't sink because, you know, they were hollow, and they actually used their pistols and shot holes in the barrels to sink them. So, you know, we have a lot of garbage out there, and we're going to have to deal with the results of this kind of...
What will it eventually do to the human genetic chain?
Well, the damage will be subtle. It will cause the next generation to be slightly less physically able, and then they're going to have more pollution to cope with. So you get people, you know, who are not able to cope, and you give them more to cope with. You've got a deteriorating public health scene. So you're going to see earlier chronic disease, probably juvenile diabetes, chronic heart disease in the 20s, a lot of asthmas and allergies, which are inability to cope with your environment, and the cancer rate will go up. You know, we've already made this commitment, and we've got to stop polluting our oceans and our air.
You're talking about not suicide, but omnicide.
Correct.
Eventually.
Killing plants, animals. I just got back from the Marshalls. They've had their arrowroot wiped out on the northern islands. It doesn't grow there anymore, and that was one of their staple food crops. You know, you can wipe out your own food.
Go ahead, please.
Yes, good morning, Jack. I'd like to commend Dr. Bertell on her work and her research into this fallout problem and alerting the public to the great danger from fallout. And my husband is classed as one of the atomic veterans, as he attended the Nevada test site in July 1957. So I feel very strongly about this. He passed away, and he ended up in a wheelchair, had 2 types of cancer, and this was pretty well contributed to these test sites down in Nevada, so I feel very strongly about this. I'd like Dr. Bertell's comments on this.
Well, that 1957-58 were some of the dirtiest of the tests. There was some negotiation between the U.S. and the Soviet Union about a test ban, and so the military wanted to get their tests in, and they were years of many tests and very dirty tests. Incidentally, I think Terry Fox was born in one of those years. Yeah. I think it was 58.
Yes, my husband went down with the service and with no protection. I understand 3 people, one from England, one from the States, and one from Canada, one from Ottawa, are doing researches on this. I also understand there was a secret document in London, England, written in '52, wanting a full report on
reaction to machinery, equipment, and personnel who attended these sites, personnel who were down there with and without protection. My husband went down without protection, and 2 years after he attended these sites, his muscles started deteriorating. He never smoked. He had 2 types of cancer in his lungs when he passed away.
And there's no doubt in your mind that it was caused by being at the Nevada test site
I
in
am
56.
positive it is.
Ma'am, thank you. Give me the address of your group in Toronto before you go.
All right, it's 67 Mowat Avenue.
Mowat.
M-O-W-A-T. And we're Suite 343. Toronto M6K 3E3.
Suite 343, 67 Mowat, M-O-W-A-T Avenue, Toronto, M6K 3E3, Institute for Public Health Concern. Thanks, Dr. Bertell.
Thank you.
I'll be back with a free-for-all after the break.
Thanks.
So, what are we doing here? We're going to do the Nielsen clip right away?
I think so.
Testing, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 4, 3.
Basically, he says, no, I'm not going to resign. Yes, I'm going to run again. It's constituents to decide whether or not my credibility's been damaged. I took out all the shout. There were some really awful shouting matches. Really.
Say a few words, please.
Now is the time for all good.
Good morning, and a word about the story, the major story we're working on for today's noon news hour. Puzzling through how this train crash at Hinton could have happened. 2 possibilities, the railway says: signal failure or human error. And the computers show the signals were working fine. 3 crewmen aboard that freight train would have had to ignore 2 signals to get onto the wrong track so the collision could happen. We'll look at this further today at noon. Now back to Jack Webster.
Dr. Bertell was indeed somewhat horrifying this morning. Just for the moment, though, we're going to go to Victoria, where Jim Nielsen, the health minister, met with members of the gallery and gave his decisions about his future.
Did you consider resigning at all?
No.
Talk it over with the Premier?
Well, my discussions with the Premier are private.
Are you upset that this all came out?
Of course I'm embarrassed and upset, yes, but so what? That's life.
Mr. Nielsen, do you think the incident has affected your credibility?
Well, I don't know. That's not for me to decide. That's for others to decide, obviously.
Will you seek re-election in the next election? Will you run again when you're Brian?
Certainly, of course.
The Premier said you're going to have to straighten things out with your constituents. How are you going to go about that?
Well, I guess anytime you seek re-election or renomination, you have to straighten things out with your constituents because they're the ultimate judges. They make the decision for you. But that would be normal procedure in constituencies.
You're not doing anything special beforehand in the meantime?
Nothing out of ordinary.
So there's Mr. Nielsen's decision. Despite everything, he's decided not to resign. He's going to run again, and his constituents will decide on his acceptability. I think the word used is credibility, acceptability as a candidate if and when the next election comes. Well, I got to tell you that Rosalie Bertell, whom I interviewed once about 10 or 12 years ago, really was, in her own factual way, a downer. Because when she talks about 16 million casualties and 157 million tons of radioactive materials in the skies above it, I questioned her about that twice. I thought she meant maybe 157,000 tons. But she said, no, 157 million tons of pollutants in the northern hemisphere. Well, the atomic time clock is ticking, so it's just a question of time, I suppose. Free for all. Go ahead, please.
Hello.
Good morning, ma'am.
Good morning. I am absolutely appalled at Mr. Nielsen's statement. You know, he reaffirmed his vows with his wife 2 years ago. And it has been going on there. I mean, that's swearing before God that you are clean. And how people can have any confidence in the cabinet where they try and cover everything up. I mean, he should have resigned. McClellan should have resigned.
I said that myself, ma'am, and thank you for your call. That was my view on the subject, and it hasn't changed. It's a question of when you embarrass the Premier and you embarrass the government, and it reduces the confidence in the abilities of the Cabinet. Go ahead, please.
Good morning, Jack.
Morning.
I was just interested in how you got your career started. And,
My career?
Yes.
How I got started in the business?
In the broadcasting business, yes.
Do you want the truth?
No, you can lie a bit if you want.
Quite simple. My mother was a very strong person, and my father was an engineer in the Clyde.
Oh, I see.
And my mother was kind of anxious that we didn't go into the shipyards or the engineering shops. And I had a very bright elder brother who was spotted by a school teacher as someone who had some literary ability. And he had a friend who was the editor of the Glasgow Evening Times.
Oh, I see.
So my brother Sandy went into the Times as an office boy. And when I saw his nice, clean job and the money he was making, the time he was 16, he was making more money than my father, I followed him into a competing newspaper office, and that's how I started it. And then I worked in the Sun out here after the war, where I was for some time the city editor, assistant city editor, legislative reporter, police reporter, the lot. I had a parting of the ways with the managing editor, an old friend of mine called Hal Strait. And I went into radio working on CJOR. And I've never looked back since, but a couple of dozen times you look back and wonder. But that's how I got into it.
Okay, well, you're doing a good job, and keep it up.
Thank you. Go ahead, please.
Hey, good morning, Jack.
Morning.
The $18 billion man, our Premier, was on For the Record over the weekend. He was questioned about the cutbacks to the homemaker services because apparently there's a $200,000 overrun or something in that service. And the reporters tried to tie that in with the $118 million overrun in the highways budget. And the $18 billion man, that's our debt in this province, went on about how highways also serve people. But I try to tie it in with what's happening down at the Expo site. You people reported over the weekend that the roofs down in the pavilions at Expo don't have enough bracing. And Expo was worried that the roofs might cave in during the show, so they've ripped out the ceilings down at Expo at great expense to the taxpayer. No one's saying how much this is costing in order to put in some more bracing.
I don't know about the roofs at the ceiling at Expo.
Well, that was reported on your weekend news hour.
But I said, I don't know about it, but I felt that it was a wrong choice to cut the Vancouver Homemaker Service, or the Homemaker Service, by $200,000. The point was made that the service in Vancouver is about a little better and higher standard than elsewhere, and Vancouver has to cut back. But I think with 118 million extra for highways, that it was a mistake to knock 200,000 off the homemaker service.
Well, Jack, I think it's time the reporters became reporters and not so much boosters for this Expo project. I think a little digging on your part would drag out a lot more of these stories. I think you're being a little too soft on these birds in Victoria.
I'm certainly not about to knock Expo at this particular moment unless it's something of considerable import.
Well, I think in relation to the rest of the province and services to people, what's going on, I think it's more than appropriate to knock Expo as far as priority spending of this government.
Where necessary, I agree with you, and I think the priority spending and not giving it to homemakers was a bad, bad mistake.
Thank you, Jack.
Thank you. Go ahead, please.
Good morning, Jack.
Morning.
Just before I run out of here, I thought I'd give you a quick call. You remember a few years ago when the government took away the $100 tax credit on the income tax?
Yeah.
I was wondering whether you might speak to the appropriate people or something. The donor cards, if people had proof that they had donor cards, maybe we could get that $100 back, and maybe we could get some more donors out there.
Oh, you're talking about the automatic charity tax credit?
Absolutely.
Well, I'll put that down for my income tax interview for the end of the year, which is coming up, and I'll be back after the break.
Expo.
Better be careful what you do in downtown Vancouver this week, because all the justice ministers, attorneys general, and John Crosbie, the federal justice minister, are in town for a conference. So I should imagine the forces of law and order will be on their best behavior tippy-toes this week. And if possible, we're going to snag John Crosbie, the Minister of Justice, to appear on the program tomorrow morning. We're working on a couple of other things as well, but Crosbie will be one of the targets, the Honourable John Crosbie, at 9 a.m. precisely.
Expo 86. 81 days to go.